Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Bubsy in Claws Encounters of the Fur Kind, brought to us by Accolade. Bubsy's become one of the more infamous mascot-like characters from this era of gaming, featured in a handful of games, 2 for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, 1 for the Atari Jaguar, and then of course the worst of the worst, Bubsy 3D for the PlayStation 1. And as a shock to almost everyone, including myself, Bubsy is coming back in 2017 with a new game for modern consoles. But this is the original Bubsy, the one that started it all. So here we go with Bubsy for the Super Nintendo.
What could possibly go wrong?
Bubsy is filled with a lot of pop culture references throughout. Most levels in the game are parodies of movies or television shows or famous lines from such, and Bubsy even is voiced in these little scenes before the levels, which has become kind of part of the charm of Bubsy, or one of the things that makes you hate Bubsy, depends on how you feel about it. I actually always loved this game, though it is exceptionally difficult, and the main reason for that is because of the speed that Bubsy is able to get. You can die very easily, because it's one-hit death. Along with that one-hit death, though, there's a ton of enemies that are going to try to kill you, projectiles that are near impossible to see from time to time, and anytime you have to scale upwards, aka jumping up multiple platforms up into the top part of the screen, you're pretty much doomed, because you're not sure exactly what's going to be above you, and enemies can come out of nowhere and kill you that way. Bubsy can drown by falling into water, as well as he also has fall damage. If you fall from too great of a height, you will die. Though thankfully, you can save yourself if you do your glide. Basically, the only control for Bubsy is jumping, and hitting jump again will cause Bubsy to glide. Because of this, you can get over larger gaps, or at least be able to take out enemies using the glide, as well as you'll be able to save yourself when you're falling. If you do it even just right before you hit the ground, it'll still end up saving you. The game is broken up into 16 levels, with 5 themed worlds and then the final space station themed level that you get to at the end of the game. At the end of every 3 levels, you face off with a boss and then move on to the next themed world for the next set of levels. The first set of levels here, as you can see, are kind of based around mountains or grassy plains, and there's a few themed levels very similar to this throughout the course of the game, with the only ones that really stand out are the Wild West and the Carnival themed levels. One thing to help you out though is Bubsy starts off with 9 lives, because of course he does, because he's a bobcat. And because of this, you at least have some leniency when it comes to getting used to things. There's also a plethora of extra life opportunities. Extra lives are represented by the Bubsy t-shirts with numbers on them. 1 obviously will give you 1 life, and 2 will obviously give you 2, and so on. There's also a handful of other power-ups Bubsy can get, including invincibility and a cloaking type ability that he's able to get as well. The main form of collectibles in Bubsy are the yarn balls, which is what you're trying to save, and 500 will net you an extra life.
More like a bridge too short.
You can also find some extra continues from time to time, and a few other things spread out throughout the game. There's a plethora of crates that you can see, and some of these are ones with anvils on them, which are basically just solid objects. If you run into them, you'll end up knocking yourself unconscious for a few seconds. There's banana crates, which will cause banana peels to go everywhere, and Bubsy will slip, though thankfully, both running into a solid object like the anvil or a wall, as well as the bananas, won't kill Bubsy. It could potentially lay Bubsy down so that he may end up getting killed by another enemy nearby, or slide him into an enemy, but thankfully he won't end up dying from this. The game features a ton of trial and error because there's a lot of checkpoints. It's good to kind of get your bearings and not really run as fast as possible, though you may of course want to, since it's a lot of fun to get a lot of speed with Bubsy, though you're probably going to end up running into an enemy. Throughout practicing the game, I took a ton of notes to make sure in each level, kind of certain areas where I expected to be troublesome spots, and remind myself of enemies that were upcoming. At the end here of this world, we take on the first boss, which are represented by these two yarn ball-like spaceships. All you have to do is jump up in order to hit both of them twice. Once they're both defeated, you complete the boss fight. This is a boss that we'll see similarly throughout the course of the game, as we have a couple of boss fights exactly like this, just getting more difficult. You can run accidentally into the ship itself, and then of course the giant yarn ball below it, which will end up causing you to lose a life. Once that's completed though, we're moving on to the second themed world of the game in Stage 5, which is a Carnival themed level. I've always liked this level, though the song can get a little bit repetitive, but also at the same time can be quite catchy. You can use the strongman game in order to propel yourself upwards on top of the roller coaster, where there's a lot of enemies that could potentially run into you. There's boots throughout this that will end up kicking you backwards. They won't kill you, but they knock you backwards, which could land you into enemies. The worst enemies in the game, far and away, are the egg-throwing enemies. These guys are all throughout the course of the game, and they will pop out of nowhere, and usually are already throwing eggs before you even see them. So if you jump up and one's just barely above you, you end up getting cracked by an egg directly into the face. I hate these guys, and I always have. I can't even recall the amount of game overs I got as a kid trying to beat this game because of those guys alone.
Back there.
At the beginning of level number 5, you can jump into the roller coaster, but be careful because it's hard to do so. You can die if the roller coaster's already started moving, and then if the roller coaster gets to the end of its track and you're still on it, you die as well. So lots of potential death right from the very get-go. And the game's very good at that, giving you a ton of potential death spots, usually at the very beginning of levels before you've even gotten your bearings and have an idea where you need to go. Climbing up the rest of this roller coaster here, we're going to make a jump onto this platform here. You'll see a bunch of these doors throughout the course of the game, some of which will lead you to bonus areas. I will show one bonus area briefly near the end of the game. You don't really get anything other than potentially an extra life if you're able to complete the bonus areas, but they are infamously difficult just trying to get through them, so most of the time I just ignore them and keep on moving through the level. Though you do have to use these doors from time to time in order to progress through the levels, where you'll go through one and be teleported to another part of the stage, which you'll see in level 3 here of the Carnival themed world. We'll have to do a bunch of that in a maze-like area.
Shouldn't that be fearless? Uh-oh.
At the beginning of level number 6, we're going to start off by once again using like the strongman game here to bounce us up into the air, the test of strength, flying us way up high, though there are some UFOs kind of floating overhead that can end up running into us. You can get a big extra point score boost if you're able to grab that hourglass as well there. There's some tricky platforming on top of the broken roller coaster pieces. Thankfully, there's no roller coaster here, or else it wouldn't last long, that is for sure. I like going to the upper part of the stage as I find it a lot easier to traverse. Thankfully, a lot of levels in Bubsy have multiple paths for you to take to get through, though one or more usually ends up being easier than other ones. For example, in the Carnival level, I like to go up to the top if possible. Now we enter in kind of the maze area. Here we're going to go through a series of doors, and there's a few different ways you can kind of go through here. Some will lead to dead ends though, so I'm just going to try to take the most direct path to get myself through here. It's also annoying that there's a few enemies as well throughout here that can be a little bit of a pain. I do like the ice creams though. If you run into them, they won't actually kill you, but you have a nice little funny animation if you do end up getting hit by them. When you make it out of this door, do a running leap over to the right and grab an extra one up before then going back to the door right next to it. Then you'll finally be on top of this roller coaster part. Do a big run all the way down. Make sure that you hit the exclamation point, which I didn't, so that you'll have a checkpoint right before the boss. This boss is pretty much identical to the one we just dealt with, just a little bit more difficult and faster, I think, but still pretty easy to deal with. And we're moving on to World 3, the Wild West themed stages.
Well, it worked for Clint.
The Wild West themed levels are unique in that they're broken up into two different areas. The first part of each is on a train. Then at the end of the train you'll hit a switch and then go down into the valley, which is where the rest of the stage takes place. Because of this, they seem particularly long compared to the other levels. The train parts are pretty difficult. You have a bunch of little spikes that are set up. You have these weird creatures that kind of blink at you, just stationary, but they also hurt you with spikes if you land on them. The awesome, cool-looking giraffes with sunglasses you can bounce off of. And a few different other woolies, of course, that we're also dealing with. Though, I do particularly like the conductor-style hats the woolies have during this stage. Another enemy that can be annoying is the chickens, because they'll fly overhead with an egg in their mouth and drop it, and they can sometimes, once again, hit you when you're trying to jump upwards up a thing because you'll just run into them, or you'll end up getting hit by their egg on top of your head, even if you don't quite see the chicken on screen. Now we're down into the canyon. Start off by doing a jumping leap over to the right. There's a couple of paths during these stages, unlike the train, which was very linear. We're going to work our way up the top portion, though, and kind of stay up as much as possible. There's a ton of cactuses set up throughout here that you can easily run into, which of course will kill you because they're spiky death. There's also the gophers that pop out of holes that are shooting guns. They don't really fire their guns. They're just a very unique looking sprite of these gophers jumping out with ammo belts and guns in both hands. Do a nicely timed leap over to the right during the course of this. You have these big kind of like valleys that you can kind of go down in hill-like areas, but I prefer to kind of just jump over them and avoid the rocks and even going down into them if at all possible. Watch out for the tumbleweed enemy going by, and there's an egg-throwing guy right after that. It's one of the many notes I had. I ended up running into that guy a few times during my practice runs. Thankfully, though, we're at the end of this area. I'm going to run up here, finish off the stage, and move on to level number 8.
Go ahead, make my day.
Level number 8 starts us off once again back on top of the train. I also find it funny that you can actually crack the eggs, like the egg supply of the guys throwing eggs, but it doesn't stop them from throwing the eggs, so it's just kind of an interesting thing that they put that egg there. Though you can crack them, and it's kind of a cool little animation for that. Like we did before, we're going to try to stay on top of most of the trains. There are a little bit of extra paths because you can kind of go in some of the train cars, but I usually just avoid that unless I have to. A couple of extra lives though, thankfully. You're probably getting a little bit low on lives if you're playing the game from the beginning at this point, because there's some really difficult areas we've already gone through, and the game just gets harder from here. Bounce off of these giraffes, and you can actually get the invisible ink thing, which will not make you invincible, where you will be able to defeat the enemies, but they can't see you and you can walk through a majority of enemies. It's a bit weird as far as the way this works, but an interesting power-up nonetheless. Over here, you have to push this block over to the right, and we can use that to kind of get up. You can do a running jump as well if you don't want to use that block. Then be careful dropping down here because of the woolly waiting for you in the front car, and be sure to hit the switch and move on to the canyon. Once you're down the canyon, watch out for the cactuses that are immediately in front of you, basically, when you start off this area. Just a little ways in, though, thankfully I'll hit a checkpoint, but then I end up losing my first life. It's really hard not to accidentally lose a life or two during the course of this playthrough. No matter how much I've practiced over the years, and mostly over the last couple of months getting this run together, I still end up dying a few times. However, thankfully because of that checkpoint, we're not set back too far, and most times in the game, as long as you're hitting the checkpoints, you won't be set back too far if you do end up losing a life. I like hitting the firecracker TNT-like boxes because they send you really, really high up in the air, which can be sometimes fun to cover a good distance and fly over a lot of enemies. If you do a running jump into them and propel off, you can clear a lot of distance by doing so. Taking the upper path here, which can sometimes be a little bit tricky just because there are those wonderful egg throwing guys like right there trying to hit me when I'm trying to climb up. But there's a plethora of items such as different yarn balls of different types and boxes of them in order to build up a good count of them. The exit for the level is actually above us, so don't head over to the right here. You want to climb up this hill, watch out for this woolly, and you can finish the stage up right here. Bit weird that they decide to kind of have it end it right on the top part here, but that's something you'll see also with a couple of the later levels, with the endings for them being in a few different height locations.
My contract does not mention paint.
Level number 9 starts us off one more time on the train. Continue over to the right side. It's pretty much the same exact setup that we've already dealt with the last few stages as we make our way through. A couple more giraffes though that we get to see and bounce off of them. Be very careful here. I die a lot at this spot, so I take my time trying to get up and get past this one woolly throwing the eggs at us. And there's a checkpoint right after him, which is annoying if you end up dying at that spot since you were so close to being able to get a checkpoint. Some of the train cars you can run in front of, other ones you can't, which is always a bit odd with these kind of levels. Be careful of the bananas that you don't accidentally hit them because they will probably send you careening right into that particular woolly. I take out a couple of the chickens before I do a running leap up here just to make sure that they're out of the way far enough so I don't accidentally run into them. At the end though, be very careful falling down and hitting the exit because there is one of those spiky guys waiting for you right outside the front of the train. And finally now back into the canyon for the last time. Start off, we're going to be running down this hill, make a nice little running leap, timing it right, we can get over a little bit of distance there. Anytime I can get speed, I try to do so. Bouncing off of this dynamite, you can actually get to this platform up here, which will grant you 2 extra lives, which is always a nice little thing to your life count. Be sure to hit the check mark here, because this part can be difficult. As I just proved, immediately running into a rock is trying to get over these areas. Be a little bit more cautious this time around, though. Sometimes I can end up bouncing off that weird dinosaur-like guy and end up still hitting the rocks when trying to get past. A couple of these jumps can be very difficult just because of the timing that's required to get past the rocks, and momentum with Bubsy, as you've noticed probably throughout the course of the run, can be a little bit weird at times. Grab the extra life if you want to risk watching out for those rocks, and then keep moving along to the right. There's plenty of these areas in a row that we have to deal with. At the top of this hill, though, is the final checkpoint for the stage, and now we're facing off with the boss, which is a little bit different, thankfully. You have just one yarn ball UFO that you have to deal with, and you have to hit it 4 times instead of just 2. And he drops off other woolies along this, which can be difficult to kind of stay up, but I like to kind of keep floating and stay on the top part of the screen until he's done, then drop back down and finish off the woolies. The battle is not over until all the other enemies are done, and because of this, you can still end up dying and have to restart the fight, which is really annoying.
Yeah, I didn't like this stuff.
The next theme world is another forest kind of level, similar to the first world, but this one has kind of a Canadian twist on it. We have a few beavers and other things that we'll have to deal with. I love the trees that are done in the shape of pencils, where you can actually bounce off the erasers and send yourself flying up into the air. The path through the levels is a little bit more complicated. You have like the bottom part, which is kind of like a shore that you can run across, but you have to be very careful of the water, which will instantly kill Bubsy if you land anywhere near it, as well as you have the upper path like kind of up into the air, and then kind of a middle path through the platforms as well. Gonna grab myself this invincibility so I can have that for a little bit of time and run through a decent amount of the enemies. You can kind of see the upper path up there. If you use the erasers to your advantage, you can kind of get up high enough so that you'll be able to get to the upper area. We're going to land on this platform here and use that to kind of ride across a tiny bit. We'll have to worry about this turtle that tries to push the platform backwards, but by taking him out, we can then continue the ride safely over to the right side. This is something we get to do a couple of times during these levels. When you do make it over to the right side, we will have to jump off of it here. We're going to land on this side of this waterfall thing and move on down. You'll have these geysers from time to time that will cause you to go backwards. Be very careful when you get sent backwards here, though, that you land safely on a platform below, which can be a little bit difficult. Introduced in this level are the switches. There's a handful of them in these levels as well as in the final level of the game, and they end up actually affecting the water level below you. In the last level of this set of stages, you'll have to hit a couple of switches in order to actually make it to the boss fight.
Next time, I get a stunt cat.
As we begin the next level, start off by running to the right. Watch out for a couple of spiky tree stumps that are remaining. We're going to bounce up to the top part and start going across here. There's an angry egg-throwing woolly waiting for us, a couple of them that we have to deal with, which I always usually end up losing a life there. We're going to jump on top of this and take the water over to the right and make sure that we hit this checkpoint before continuing on. There's flying fish throughout this area that have a little bit of a difficult pattern at times to exactly get the best of them, but then we're going to jump on these platforms and use them to kind of ride across. One of the more annoying enemies in the level is the beaver enemy, which throws these weird projectiles out at you, which can be a bit difficult to actually dodge around. Hit the check mark, and then we're going to drop on down to the platform below. As long as you land at least on one of these platforms right around here, you'll be okay. And then we're going to ride across the rest of this little area here using this platform. Once you come to a stop, you'll be able to get another checkpoint and then start heading up a series of platforms upwards. From here, head over to the right. Watch out for this woolly that's going to throw some cheese wheels down towards you. And you can make a jump over to the right or just follow all these platforms slowly downwards. Then just finish up the stage by continuing over to the right, watching out for a couple of the bug enemies that are coming at you. There's one more woolly throwing eggs down, but that's where the end of the stage is, and we're moving on to the third and final level of this themed world.
Is there a veterinarian in the audience?
As this level begins, we're going to start off by bouncing off the pencil eraser and head up. Just past this evil tree which can kill you, watch out for the woolly throwing some eggs. Land safely on this platform after a little bit of water, and then continue on the rotating platform and on to here. Just a little bit after you get on it, though, you'll jump off and land on these singular platforms. You'll be able to then ride across a little bit of space and get this checkpoint. Keep heading on over to the right, and as you do so, you'll be able to land on this platform here, which you'll be able to ride for quite a bit of time. As you're riding it, though, it will go through a couple of platforms, as well as there's another one that you can start riding as well, though we're going to stay on the one that we were on to begin with, though you can activate the other one, have that kind of go along with you if you want to do that. As you're riding along these platforms, you will come to one that has a checkpoint and a switch on it. Be sure to briefly get off of this platform and hit this switch. This is one of the ones you need to in order to make it to the boss fight. Right past that, though, there will be a beaver throwing projectiles out at you, which can hit you dead on from the platform that you're riding, so be very careful of that. There's a couple of times I ended up dying because of that beaver in particular. Right after that, we're going to drop on down here. We can hit another checkpoint, climb up these singular platforms, watching out again for another beaver throwing projectiles at us, and be sure to hit this switch located here. From there, drop on down and land safely on the beach. As long as you hit both of those switches that we need it to, you'll be able to get to the boss. Run to the right, hit the checkpoint, and then drop on down to the beach below, which will then start to fill with water, and you can use this raft in order to get up. Make sure that you, of course, get on the raft, and this will take you to the boss fight. For this boss, you have to deal with another one of the UFOs that will go around and fire missiles out, but I'm going to make this very simple to deal with. We're just going to jump up and hit him multiple times in a row as he's coming around, and we can take him out in just a couple of seconds. Thankfully though, the platform, the raft, will actually kind of stay with you as you're doing this, so you should be able to land on it most of the times, just the missiles can cause issues with it. The next themed levels for 13 through 15 is another forest-like one. This time it's a more rainforesty jungle type, and you'll have a whole bunch of spiders and other enemies to deal with. You can actually run all the way over to the very right from the beginning of the stage and just go all the way over there if you want, but you'll end up making it to a dead end with no way to get upwards. So you need to start climbing the trees and make your way up them in order to eventually make it to where the exit is. Once you get high enough, you'll be able to start heading over to the right a little bit. This is a tricky set of levels for sure, because there are a whole lot of platforms and no direct way to kind of get through. You can just kind of make your way over, and as long as you're staying up on these platforms, you'll be safe. If you fall too far down below, you won't be able to save yourself. The game will just end up killing you. I guess you fall too far, you end up dying, so be careful of that. It's a pretty good distance that you have to fall in order for this to happen, but it's a bit annoying nonetheless. Once you make it over to the right, though, start climbing up the remainder of these leaves, and you'll eventually land on this platform where we'll be able to finish up the first stage of this world.
What, and give up show business?
The second level here is more of the same. We're going to start off by climbing upwards. There's a few enemies waiting for us as soon as we do those, so we have to be very careful of them and just kind of hit these edges as we're making our way up. Just like we did before, once we get high enough up, we'll then start heading over to the right, climbing when we need to, and we'll be able to get up on a lot of these platforms throughout. Always recommend doing the glide when you end up falling downwards, because you may end up landing on top of an enemy and use that to actually bounce your way up to higher platforms. Use the spider webs. You can use them to kind of bounce your way up, though be careful of the second one here, because you may accidentally hit a woolly if you end up going too far to the right when you do end up bouncing up. Grab this extra life as you're going through this area, and then continue up the leaves a little bit, and then you can work your way over to the right by doing a nice little jump. There's a couple of bees and one of these weird spaceship things that if you bounce off of while doing the glide, you'll bounce pretty high up, as well as do a very slow descent, which will allow you hopefully to land safely. Just a little bit past that though, start climbing up once again, and then make another running leap over to the right. Thankfully though, we're not too far from the end of the stage. We're able to finish it up and move on to level number 15.
Somebody dial 911.
As the level begins, we're going to do a running leap over to the right and bounce off of this spider web before heading up a series of these tree platforms. I do like a lot of the colors that they used, and instead of having just one color of green for the leaves, they did a variety of them. We're going to land on this platform and enter into this door, which will take us to a bonus area. I'm just going to fall off the side here, but you can basically see what the bonus areas are. You have to kind of maneuver through all of these different pretty difficult jumps to kind of get to a platform and then eventually get one extra life if you're able to do it. Right after we come out of that though, we're going to go right back through the door, and that will take us to where we want to go, which is a little bit backwards but much higher up, and this will allow us to start traversing through the level a bit easier. The level for the most part is pretty straightforward. A little bit ways in, once we get past a couple more jumps, we'll be making it to a small little bamboo-like maze that we'll have to travel through. Just be very careful when you enter here that you wait for this woolly, because you'll kind of like bounce right down and can potentially land on your head if you're going too quickly. I died a couple of times from that guy. It's not much more to the stage. We're just going to kind of be making our jumps over to the right, climbing up every little bit, sometimes making leaps of faith just to make sure that we hopefully land safely on a platform instead of into an enemy. And then when we make it to the boss here, it's a little bit difficult. You have two of the UFOs again, but they're spawning a ton of enemies and also dropping giant yarn balls down. We're going to get immediately up into the air, and once we do that, we're going to take out both of those guys before then bouncing on the remaining enemies that are here and finish up the boss before now going to the final stage of the game.
Well, are you still playing this thing?
The final level of the game takes place in the Woolly spaceships. Start off by climbing up into the first one. Be careful the entire way through this level. Take your time. There's a lot of enemies, stuff falling from above. When you make jumps, they may end up landing on top of you. Tons of projectile enemies throughout. Just an absolute nightmare trying to get through this stage, though it's thankfully relatively linear once you kind of figure things out a bit. Heading over to the left here, after a series of enemies, you'll make it to the first teleporter. Take that, and you'll end up into this part of the spaceship where you'll be able to hit a checkpoint and then have to go over a small series of gaps with woolies coming down. Be very careful here because there's a woolly above us that will come crashing down. He doesn't come down right away, it's kind of weird. The next woolly right after that, the one with the cannon firing at you, you have to wait in between his shots, do a leap, and then do a glide right away so that you'll land on him in order to kill him. Go a little bit over, take another teleport, drop on down, and hit this switch before going to the right and using these bounce pads to get up. Once you are inside the ship, go to the left a little bit and hit the other switch. If you didn't hit that first switch outside the ship, that switch will be covered with water and you won't be able to use it. Head over to the right, drop down here hitting this switch, which that last one just allowed us to get this one, and use the teleporter. Right to the left of this, you have to be very, very careful. Jump between the projectiles, kill both woolies, and then jump up here. Wait a moment for the cheese wheel to come rolling down, then head up and continue upwards on a few series of ramps on a couple of projectiles coming your way, and plenty of cheese wheeling down at you. Like I said, it's really difficult. After that, hit this checkpoint, but then go through the teleporter multiple times. There's a couple little bonus items you can grab along the way if you want to do so, but I'm just going to skip them and get to this part here where we have to work our way down a couple of ramps, also dealing with the other enemies that we've been dealing with. Once you're down that ramp and head down here, you're going to head over to the left and use this platform to rotate around and get to the left side. Be careful of another woolly kind of walking your way, hit another switch, then backtrack to this area here that was flooded a moment ago. Continue down and over to the right. You can grab an extra life down below that little gap there if you want to grab it. There's a woolly down there, but I'm just going to skip it. Make sure when you make it here, you hit this checkpoint. It's a little bit difficult to do so because of all the projectiles, and you really have to time your jumps. Like really short, small jumps in order to hit these enemies. The good thing is, once you defeat the enemies, they stay dead even if you end up coming back and dying, because we're right at the final boss now. Over to the right before the final boss hatch, though, is an extra life, and now it's time for the final boss. Take a very small breather, and now the boss battle begins. I do not have 100% strategy for this boss. My best strategy is to fly into him using the glide, keep gliding, and try to hit him multiple times with the same glide. He fires out so many projectiles so quickly, you'll die within a second or so of the battle beginning. I had to do so many retries over and over again before I finally start to get the hang of it and just kind of stay inside of him with the floating ability. Once he's done, you get the brief ending to Bubsy. So there you have it, Bubsy for the Super Nintendo. The credits here, you actually get to manually scroll through them so you can take your time if you want to read all the names and everybody that was involved with the project. And whenever you're finished up, you can press start and go back to the title screen and start the game all over again if you want to do so. I like Bubsy. I think it has a lot of charm. I've always liked the character and his quirky sense of humor with the stupid puns constantly throughout the beginning of the levels, though I can't stand Bubsy 3D. At the same time, though, it's a very highly difficult game that's a bit rough to recommend, though if you want to give it a shot, I wish you the best of luck. But with that, guys, I'm going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.